dugsiga boardingka iyo maalinlaha ah ee Amano Boarding and Day School.
Rahim, assalamu alaikum, dear Form 3 students. We will continue our lesson in chapter 5, trade. You remember we were talking about, we were making revision of history in Form 2. We were revising some of the topics from the Form 2 classes. And you remember we have already covered the Form 3 textbook, so that's why we are doing that. So today our topic is about, the impact of slave trade. So we are talking about the political, economic and social impact of slave trade. What was the effect of slave trade on African people in terms of socially and economically and politically? And then the second point we will talk about is also about abolishment of slave trade. Why was slavery finally abolished and stopped from all over the world? So the main importance that we are going to discuss today are about these two topics: impact of slave trade politically, socially and economically, and there is abolishment of slave trade. Okay, as you can see from here, the political impact of slave trade included the following points. What is the first important point? The first one is emergence of non-traditional leaders. So before slave trade, traditional leaders were there, but after the slave trade started in Africa, there were many, non-traditional leaders that were seen and emerged as a result of slave trade. So this non-traditional leader, what did they bring? They brought, what's called intense inter-ethnic and rivalries. The different ethnic groups that live in Africa started to fight one another as a result of the slave trade. The tribal war is intensified. The tribal war is really increased a lot. So the first political impact is emergence of non-traditional leaders. What did this finally cause? Tribal wars among the African communities in West Africa, Central Africa, and East Africa. The other political impact from the transatlantic slave trade on Africa was the import of firearm revolutionized fighting. Before the transatlantic slave trade, the firearms were non-existent or were unknown mostly. But after slave trade started, the Europeans, they used to divide and rule. They were making Africans, to have weapons and guns. So those guns that were imported by the African leaders, increased the war among them. So the import of firearms, what did it do? It revolutionized fighting. The states that received firearms became very powerful and prosperous. Why did they become powerful and prosperous? Because they were able to conquer those who have less weapons, those who did not have the firearms like them. They were able to conquer, and when they conquered, they used it to take their men and women as slaves, and then Europeans used it to come and take from them. In return, the Europeans, they used it to provide firearms and luxury items. Examples are those two, three, Azanti, Dahomey, and Fant. These three kingdoms or empires, they profited mostly from selling off slaves and in return getting firearms. The other one was the empires of Oyo and the Congo collapsed due to their lack of imported firearms. We stated the second point that some empires were getting firearms. As a result, they became very strong and they were able to conquer others. And now what about those who were not able to get those firearms? Like Oyo and the Congo, they completely were destructed because they did not have firearms to defend themselves. So it became like the wisdom in the jungle. The weak is oppressed by the strong. And the other political impact was complete towns and villages were destroyed forever. Towns and villages were destroyed forever because of slave trade. So these are the most important political effects. The other important political effect, they also included what? Slave trade resulted in the destruction of African property. You know, African property was completely destroyed, like livestock, farms and homes, The other political impact was, on the positive side, some port cities developed and along the West African coast. What are they? Like, for example, Lagos, Nofa, Elmina, Gori, and Dakar. The other important political effect is some African leaders, they became very rich. They accumulated wealth from the slave trade. For example, two examples are the kings of Ashanti and the king of Dahomey. The word Ashanti is the term the Ashanti king was revered to. Ashanti means the king of Ashanti and Dahomey king. So slave trade resulted in the destruction of the property of Africa. You know, livestock were killed, farms were burnt into ash, homes were destroyed because of slavery. There was some positive side, some towns developed, like port cities. The examples are there. What about the economic impact of slave trade now? What about the economic impact? We talked about the political impact, and now the economic impact mostly is negative. In short, in terms of economy, the African economy declined dramatically, and the European economy developed drastically. For that reason, the introduction of manufactured goods from Europe undermined many indigenous industries. The Africans, they have their own way of producing items, manufacturing what they needed. So those indigenous industries, like the manufacture of baskets or basketry, pottery, iron work, all those were completely undermined. Why? Because now there are goods coming from from Europe. So this led to the destruction of African crafts, like the pottery, like the iron work or iron smith, basketry, pottery. The second economic impact was the people who were shipped away were between 15 to 35 years. So this is called the productive age. The productive age was gone, 15 up to 35 years. This meant that the labor force needed for agriculture and defense was gone automatically. Imagine, between 10 to 12 million people were shipped to Americas. That's the number who went alive on there. More than millions also died on the journey. Millions also died in Africa because of poverty and because of the problem left by the slave trade, the depression and the trauma. So now the productive and the labor were gone. So who are working in the agriculture? Who are going to work in the defense when the age between 15 to 35 was taken? Slave trade also led to what? It also led to the decline of the trans-Saharan trade. The trans-Saharan trade also declined. So the trans-Saharan trade was a way the Africans, interacted one another, especially North Africa and West Africa. So trans-Saharan trade finally declined because of slave trade. These are also generally the economic impact from slavery, from African slavery. What about the social impact now? We're talking about the social impact. We're talking about the political effects of slavery in Africa, the economic effects of slavery on Africa. And now let us look at the social impacts of slavery in Africa in terms of society. So now first, what happened is this organization of African families. Many members of the same family were sold into slavery. Imagine, a man and his wife and his children are living peacefully in a small village with their families and livestock. Suddenly, slave raiders attack them. They take the mother, they take the father, they take also some of the children, those who are above 10 or above 15. So only maybe it's possible they may live like the children under 10 years old. Imagine what would happen to those children under 10 years old. Their father taken, their mother taken, their older brothers and sisters taken. by force. So it was a catastrophe, or what we can say a problem that touched the West African and Central and East Africans at that time. So we can say the African families were completely disorganized and dismantled. The other social impact is the separation of families. What did it cause? Immense anxiety and misery. It caused depression. It caused, madness. It caused trauma that was not going to be gone. That would be with you forever. Imagine when your father, your mother, your sister is taken, even sometimes is raped in front of you. What would happen? That trauma is going to stay with you forever. So this is exactly what used to happen to those people. The other one was fear and security, fear and insecurity due to the constant slave raids. There was always attack. The slaves, anytime slave trade could take place, groups who profited from slavery used to attack a village, take the productive age from both male and female. So fear and insecurity, because of that constant non-stop slave trades. The other one was the African communities, they suspected one another. They were suspecting one another. The African community, they suspected one another. There was what's called enmity and hatred emerged between the African communities, So the African communities, now they suspect one another. They suspected that the neighboring community might attack and enslave them. The other community is also suspecting that their neighbor might attack them. So there will always hate and enmity among the African communities, because they suspected that the other one is planning a conspiracy in order to enslave them. The other one was slavery changed the roles of women, as men were enslaved mostly. We can say women and men, both of them were enslaved, but men were the number one. So now the job that the men used to do in Africa, now at that time many women were supposed to do, like working in the farms, So this is also another problem. This was also the social impact of slave trade. The social impact of slave trade. There were also other impacts of slave trade in general. This is the one that we are going to summarize our lesson. Other effects of the slave trade. We talked about how it affected African society, how slavery affected African society in terms of population in the previous period. And then we talked about political effect. We talked about the economic effect. We talked about also, the social impacts. What about the other effects of slave trade? The slavery, what did it do for the Europeans? The Europeans, they really took advantage of it. Development of European economies and parties grow as a result of it. Many parties in Europe grow. Lisbon, Liverpool. They really grow as a result of slave trade. The other thing that slavery did was the growth of European industries. So we can simply summarize that slavery brought progress, unprecedented progress for the Western countries. It also brought unprecedented chaos, misery, depression, and trauma for the African societies and for the African nations. So now raw materials were flowing from America to Europe, thanks to the African slave labor in the plantation. What was the other effects of slave trade? The slave labor led to what's called expansion of plantation farming in the America. The big farms in America became developed. The cotton farms, the sugar farms, the tobacco farms in the America, they became very, very huge and at the same time very productive. So in generally, today our lesson was about that. The impact is of slave trade. We talked about the impact of slave trade on Africa politically, economically, and socially. And also we talked about the effect of slave trade on Europe. So for Europe, it brought development. For Africa, it brought misery, suffering, and trauma. So that's for all today. Teacher Abdullahi wish you a blessed Mubarak. There will be also an assignment for you, inshallah. in the Amman online website. So put in your account and your password. Stay at home, stay safe. Wassalamu alaikum.